A lot of people have been asking what role undeveloped gas fields in Gaza might be playing in the current Israel Gaza war. To get an answer, I spoke to climate corruption journalist Rachel Donald, who runs the platform Planet Critical. I started by asking what current position gas has in the global energy supply.
Gas is one of the main fossil fuels that are being used to fuel the world right now. Unlike oil, however, there's lots of it left. Since 2008, academics have been warning about peak oil, and we can see that in the United States, for example, we are now drilling into shale oil, which means that we are running out. To combat this, governments and the fossil fuel company have branded LNG, liquid natural gas, as a transition fuel because it emits 40% less carbon than coal. However, that's a really, really low bar. The world should be transitioning to a renewable economy. However, to maintain control over the energy supply, which is fossil fueled, governments are keen for us to use the 125 years left of gas reserves that there are in the world.
Where is gas in the Israel Palestine region?
It's off of Gaza's coast. So a huge gas field, the Leviathan gas field, which contains 22 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, is just off of Gaza's coast. And this is just one of the many reserves of fossil fuels that are in Israel, in the occupied territory of Palestine, and in international waters. Now, in 2019, the UN released a report on these fuels, stating that they were valued at $524 billion. Now, that's half a trillion in 2019 money before, Russia invaded Ukraine and before COVID and before inflation and all of that. So it's a huge, huge, huge amount of money and a huge field for a, regime, the West, that is running out of gas since it sanctioned Russia.
Yeah, can you tell me a bit more about that? How does the Russia Ukraine war play into the West search for gas?
So when Russia invaded Ukraine, one of the first things that the EU did was slap it with sanctions and stop importing its gas. Now, we have since seen that that wasn't particularly effective because essentially what happened was other nations started importing it, rebranding it, and selling it as their gas. So there's still lots of Russian gas in the supply chain. So this was more of a performative action by the EU than anything else, but it meant that they had to find another supply. And as we can see, there was sort of like a big panic over the past few years about, would we be able to heat our homes in winter? Was there going to be enough gas? Now, interestingly, in June 2022, the European Union signed a memorandum of understanding with Israel and with Egypt to import some of the gas in the Leviathan gas field, essentially to shore up the supplies that are missing since they stopped importing Russia's gas.
Do we know who the gas field off Gaza belongs to? Is there a distinct answer here?
I'm not an expert in this, but based off of the 2019 UN report, which was on this topic, a lot of it is in international waters, right? And so it's kind of disputed and it should be shared amongst all of the countries and the states close by, including Palestine. And interestingly, the UN report does state that Israel has only existed since 1948, whereas the Palestinian people have been there for a long time. It literally says that in black and white, and so they have a sort of heritage, an inheritance to this gas. Um, and they did almost exploit it. In 1999, the Palestinian National Authority signed a deal with BG Group, which discovered the first gas field off of the coast of Gaza, which contained 1 trillion cubic feet. And the Israeli government at the time was okay with that. They thought that it would sort of help harbor good relationships between the states. Um, but essentially, with every Israeli government, that deal has changed. So every time a right-wing Israeli government gets in, they take the deal off the table. And then every time a centrist or kind of left-wing-ish government gets in, they put it back on the table. And that went on and off, kind of yo-yoing between the two until 2007, when the Israeli government went around the back of the Palestinian National Authority to negotiate directly with BG Group. That deal fell through. They went back and hurriedly tried to renegotiate that deal in summer 2008. And the UN report states that it looks like Israel was keen to get those negotiations done before invading Gaza in December 2008. And it was that invasion that took all of those gas fields off the coast of Gaza under Israeli control.
What's been the most recent deals on the table concerning that gas field in Gaza? I know there was something going on in June 2023, was there not?
In June 2022, there was the Memorandum of Understanding signed, but the most recent was October 30th this year, when 12 licenses were granted to 6 companies to explore more of the fields off of Palestine's coast, essentially.
Which companies were those, and what was the detail of those licenses?
So those companies, there were 12 of them. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but one of them was BP, one of our own. And the deals are just like any others, essentially. Exploration licenses just to go in and see what there is available to exploit.
This week, the US's energy security advisor has been visiting Israel, and he's been talking about the need to center this gas field at Palestine's post war economic reconstruction. And he said, as part of that, he's sure the Israelis will 100% allow Palestine to retain any revenues because the gas belongs to Palestine. What do you make of this assertion in the light of the current Israeli campaign on Gaza?
I think it's a very interesting assertion, and I think that there's a lot to unpack in it. Um, we could say that historically, what he's saying is absolutely nonsense. Under no circumstances would a Netanyahu government allow for Palestine to exploit these resources. Otherwise, he would have done it at some point over the past 20 years. And the fear of funding terrorism has been used a lot as an excuse to take this gas out of the hands of the Palestinian people to whom it belongs. There's another angle, though, that I think is very interesting, which is that the United States is now positioning itself as a negotiator between the two states, and coming out as if it's their idea, you know, that we're going to give some of these revenues to Palestine. It will help, it will sort of smooth over relations between the two. So they get to come out of this looking like a good guy, like the guy who kind of saved the day if this is what happens. However, it also means that you are entrapping a people who have been dispossessed and illegally occupied for 75 years into a particular regime, that of Western hegemony. Because the world is split essentially at the moment between like an energy war and a materials war. And the Western regime runs on fossil fuels. It can only run on fossil fuels because that's what it has access to. However, a renewable regime would come out of China. And I think this is one of the reasons that the West is being very slow to transition to renewable economies, because it essentially guarantees China coming up and being a dominant world power, because it has control over all of the material supply chains that you need to build a renewable economy. So I think it's very interesting that the United States could be using this as another form of neocolonialism, essentially to force a people into a form of like energy bondage, essentially, where after so long, after so much abuse, they finally get something with which to develop their economy. However, that thing that they're using to develop their economy is actually the very tool that has been used to dispossess people and to force a hegemony around the world. And really, it's not the future of a sustainable world and one in which people are treated well.
How do we discuss factors like the Gaza gas fields in this military campaign without sounding conspiratorial?
Oh, they've really done us good, haven't they? That we can't discuss resources without sounding conspiratorial, even though there is a very long history of governments knocking over regimes and invading one another and starting illegal wars in order to get their hands on it. I think, if anyone would sort of question the importance of resources, I would say two things. Um, the United States, the United Kingdom illegally invaded Iraq less than 20 years ago in order to get their hands on their oil. And we know that now, no matter the party lines of the people who organized that campaign may be. We know that now. And the other thing is that, where do you think wealth comes from? Money, even though it might be this like illusory thing that we kind of hang on to, always began as natural abundance, always began as natural resources. Power is all about being able to transform energy. It's a basic law of physics. And if you can take natural resources and turn them into wealth, that means that you have a huge amount of power. So natural resources have been, I would say, at the cornerstone of every major conflict of human societies whilst they've been trying to grow. We can look through the entire vein of history to see that. Sometimes they get wrapped up as ideological campaigns. That's a really good excuse when really you're using brute force in order to just feed your economy.